This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Good evening, everybody, on this very drizzly and wet day here in Reading. I hope you're all having a really good Easter break so far. I've got a really exciting guest for you guys today to listen to. First of many sponsored shows, hopefully. We're going to be talking all about this gentleman's book, who will be joining me imminently. We're not just going to talk about this, but we're going to talk about reading in general as well. So
this
get to that
is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
Always try and do that fade out whenever I do an assembly. I always kind of look at the year sixes because we've got one of those dials on the stereos, and they're playing the Spanish guitar music or whatever I've chosen for the kind of the intro and outro of the assembly, and they just kind of flick it, and I'm always like, just fade it down. It's a lot more professional, and I can't do it on a professional podcast. So maybe I'll give them some slack after Easter holidays. Who knows? Hope you're all good. We've currently got a massive deluge at the moment. I wouldn't say it's quite storm weather, but it's definitely April showers. And I'm in the garage again, so hopefully you can't hear the rain literally slamming down onto the roof that we've got. Also, I don't want any sympathy, but I've got a shocking cold, as you can probably hear. So we're gonna plug on with the show, business as usual. Delighted that I've got a sponsored show today. We've got a gentleman by the name of Scott Evans, who you may know as Mr. E Primary if you follow him on Twitter and you've seen his other kind of amazing things as well. We're going to be talking all about his book, 100 Ideas for Primary Teachers, Reading for Pleasure, and what a book it is. I've got it in my hands at the moment as we speak. So we're going to be talking about that as well, and also Scott's career, and generally just kind of reading in the primary sphere, really, because it's a massive thing. It's absolutely huge, and we talk a lot in education spheres about the power of reading and the pleasure and everything else. So it's really, really excited for him to be here. I'm hoping I can see his face popping up on the screen. He's in the studio. Scott, are you there, sir?
I am indeed. Thank you very much for having me, Ben. I'm really excited for this.
Fantastic. Well, first of all, technology works, which is great. Regular listeners will know that I can actually mute my mic now, which I didn't know I could up until about the fourth or fifth show I was doing. So that's really positive. And I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Scott to the Twilight show with me, Ben Thomas. To talk about his book and also other bits as well. So Scott, first of all, I know that you are calling in from Wales. What's the weather like with you at the moment?
Oh, like you, absolute deluge, but typical Wales, typical rain.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess you're on your holidays at the moment, are you?
Yeah. Second week of Easter holidays, so pretty relaxed at the moment.
Yeah, and you haven't been hit by a lurgy or anything, no?
No, fingers crossed. You know what they say, when you go off on the holidays, that's when it catches you, but no, all good so far.
Good. Well, listen, Scott, we're going to kind of get into what you've produced. That's basically what it is. It's, you've made quite a phenomenal piece of literature, really, and I've kind of had a good look through it over the last couple of weeks, and it's
thanks so much.
It's absolutely brilliant. So we're going to talk about that in a minute. But what I like to do, on my shows is kind of get to know the person. Get the audience a little bit of insight into kind of you, basically your career. How you've ended up getting to this point. So I'm going to literally hand the mic over to you, and you can tell us all about how you've got to this point in your career.
Yeah. Well, where do I begin, really? I suppose, really, my love for reading began at a sort of very young age. My parents, like I say in the introduction to my book, my acknowledgements of my book, really, I owe it really all to them. My parents, my grandparents, if it wasn't for them, and they filled my homes with, books that I could almost dream of reading. But also they took me to libraries as well. And that's where it began, really, at my young age. And it's been with me ever since. But before becoming a primary school teacher as well, I worked as a librarian. So I almost paid my community back in that respect for the thankfulness that they gave me. And I was a librarian in several local libraries. And I found myself really as becoming a librarian as well. that when people would come into the libraries, parents, teachers, even children themselves, and asking for book recommendations, nobody could really give them it. And I thought, there's a gap here that needs filling. And so I took it upon myself, really, and I became the go-to person in my library for recommending children's books. And I then took on things like running the Summer Reading Challenge, and then that helped me realize that the power that literature holds, really, in shaping, well, not just children's lives, but everybody's. And that was the beginning of my journey, really. And then fast forward a few years into my teaching career, and I almost found the same in teaching, that I found myself in a position of sort of being a teacher, but then being a reading lead, and really hoping that I could sort of promote and expose teachers then to the wonderful world of children's literature that's out there, really. And through my role of reading lead, I launched our inaugural Children's Laureate Wales in our school that I was in. And that made it onto national news, which was fantastic. And then I organised visits from amazing authors, including sort of Blue Peter Book Award winners and Waterstones Children's Book Prize winners as well. But then my passion for children's literature, as I said, never faded. And so I wanted more ways and find more ways I could share my love of reading, really, with an even wider audience. And so I developed my own website and called The Reader Teacher. And then that helped sort of promote reading children's books on a wider level. I'm known for my sort of year group reading list that I've carefully curated, thanks to my librarian and teacher experience. But also my monthly must reads I put on there each month, which is 5 of my favorite books, my book match posters. And now I've got a YouTube channel as well, which showcases the latest children's literature, really, coming out each month. And those who know me on Twitter as well, I also host sort of #Primary School Book Club, which is a monthly Twitter-based book club chat and vote for any adult involved in primary education to read the latest children's literature. And we choose to vote from a selection of 20 books published every month. And the great thing is we come back at the end of each month then to discuss the book with the winning author or the illustrator involved as well in the chat. So they have that sort of dialogue and communication with teachers as well, which is fantastic. And the innovative ways that the book club has used their books in different ways in the classroom and their schools, it's been fantastic to see. And all of this then has really led me to, well, many exciting things. I've written for Book Trust and Teach Primary magazine. I've been on the BBC talking about reading. I've hosted events with Waterstones. I've produced resources for children's publishers, which I do a lot now of to help them used effectively in the classroom. And I've also been fantastically fortunate, really, to be a judge for some amazing book awards. I've spoken about the Blue Peter Book Awards, which I've been fortunate to be on the panel with, the Lollies with Michael Rosen, the Wales Book of the Year Award. And I've also got another 2 fantastic ones lined up this year, which is the Week Junior Book Awards and also the Alligator's Mouth Award, which recognises illustrated fiction as well. And I can't wait, really, to see what those have in store. So yeah, I'm just it's been an incredible journey so far, and I just can't see where it takes me next. And really the book is where it's taken me next, and I hope that really it's just onwards and upwards from there, really.
I mean, Scott, is there anything you don't do at the moment?
I know.
That's quite a list.
Once you get me going, you know I'm a typical Welsh person. I'll just talk for Wales. So, yeah.
Yeah, I know them well. Brilliant nation, brilliant people. You know, as we said earlier, you know, off air, but through emails, my family are from South Wales, so I know it very well, really. And
Wow.
You know, the power of books and particularly in some of those valley areas is massive.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot to unpick there, really. And I'm not, you know, obviously we're here to talk about your book. We're here to kind of promote it, you know, very, very kindly sponsored by you and your publishers, Bloomsbury. But I'm just interested to kind of know how you got into kind of working a library, really, because that's, you know, obviously very, very respected, I say, career choice. Obviously you're a teacher now, and that's what you've chosen to do. But it's quite a niche. It's quite a niche thing to get into as a young man, isn't it, really?
Yeah, I suppose. I've always sort of had that passion for books, as I said, but even when I think I sort of defied the stereotype, really, because when I applied for the job, and even like when I asked about sort of feedback of my interview and things like that, a lot of the sort of candidates fit one demographic, and I think I really sort of stood out as being something different. And I sort of gained sort of a zest for sort of literature, thanks really to one of my teachers in sort of secondary school, who really awakened me to it, because towards the end of primary and beginning of secondary, and I treat it really as that sort of crunch age now, I really fell out of love with reading, particularly fiction. As a child, I grew up basically on non-fiction completely. And then I got into fiction more in sort of junior age, when stories were being read to me, things like Mr. Majaka, and obviously then the Harry Potter series was huge during that period of time as well. But yeah, working sort of in a library, I suppose, like, I was sort of, I knew I had to get a sort of a Saturday job, and one did appear. And I think it was my mum who sort of highlighted the role to me, and I think it just suited my sort of personality, my characteristics. I did want to work sort of with the public as well and understand sort of a retail facing job in that respect, but it wasn't sort of retail in the notion of shops and things like that. It was helping more from, like you said, a community focused aspect. So yeah, I suppose it was a blend of all those things, really.
And then that obviously led you to, I say a career. Obviously, you're quite early on in your career in terms of teaching. But how many years now have you been in the classroom?
So I think I'm pretty much either in my 8th or 9th year, if I sort of work it out, either in terms of like academic years or sort of
Yeah.
yeah. But yeah, I've had sort of so much experience within those 8 years, taken on sort of varying different roles as well. Because head teachers have always commented and said, "Oh, normally like sort of teachers are either strong in English or maths, but like you seem to be strong in both." Because I've been a reading lead, I've been a maths lead, but also sort of an ICT lead as well. So I do sort of have kind of lots of strengths, and I do like to put them into practice. So yeah.
And so now with the school you're at, I mean, you don't have to mention any names or anything like that at
Mhm.
all. But in terms of, have you had different schools? Have you been at the same school for the kind of the duration of your career? Have you kind of chopped around? How's it
Yeah, I
been?
have sort of chopped around in a way. I've worked in sort of many different schools, and I've sort of built up experience. But reading sort of always has remained my passion in all of them. Right from sort of being a newly qualified teacher, there was always that sort of understanding of how is Scott sort of getting his classes buzzed up about reading, and that's followed me right the way through. And then becoming a reading lead in the school was amazing. It opened me up to sort of the leadership element of reading, and that's why I was keen to put sort of a section of that into the book as well, because my book really isn't just a book purely for teachers either. It's a book for sort of educators right across the school, whether you're in a sort of teaching capacity or a leadership capacity. So yeah, I've really sort of incorporated many of my elements of my experience within the book.
So you're not only a published author now, you've also got your own class. So in terms of year groups at the moment, what age are you teaching?
So I sort of teach like mixed year 5-6 classes.
Wow, that
Yeah,
is brave. That is very brave.
yeah,
And
yeah.
rare, actually. That's really rare in the modern age, isn't it? I guess.
Yeah. So, but like I said, I've really tried to make my book grounded in that classroom experience. So, and teachers have said to me really that that's what makes it sort of accessible for them, is that it's that pick up, practical to go, and they can really take that bite-sized chunk of an idea and turn it into something bigger, better in their classrooms. Then,
Mhm. Well, let's get into the book
yeah.
and kind of the main reasons to why we're here and talking about bite size, because there are an incredible amount of books and textbooks on kind of reading theory and
Hmm.
practices and do this, do that, and these are my ideas, sort of thing. But this book is literally called 100 Ideas for Primary Teachers, Reading for Pleasure. It's out at the moment by Bloomsbury Publishers, and the tagline is from the reader teacher, which is you. And
Yeah.
despite the fact that it's probably one of the only education books that I've read that quotes the Manic Street Preachers in the acknowledgements, it's fantastic. I mean, what I'm not going to do is kind of read the whole book in terms of CBBS, but I'm going to share kind of bits and pieces from it, obviously, so we can talk about it. And one of the main things that I really like is that it's split up into 11 parts. 11
Yeah.
parts. Yeah,
Yeah.
11 parts. I haven't missed anything. And I'm just gonna quote those now. We're not going to go through part by part like a chapter, but just so people listening can get an idea of how the book is structured. So we've got raising reading children. We've got creating a reading classroom, being a reading teacher, leaders are readers, setting up a reading school, which is a really big part of this book, I think, in terms of the amount of bits you've got in there.
Yeah.
Understanding text types, cultivating a reading community, which is one that I like the most. I love that idea of the whole school being invested in it, as not just the pupils, but everyone.
Great.
Love your libraries, which makes sense in terms of
Yeah.
what you said at the start of this show. Engaging with your reading environment, participating with parents and families, which again is massive, and we'll kind of home in on that bit later on. And then working with writers and illustrators. So there is literally 100 ideas in here, all numbered, all in those parts. to literally pick up and run with those different ideas at any given time, really. And I guess really just to kind of kick off our discussion about the book, what you talked a little bit about the inspiration behind it in terms of you working in libraries and having clearly a love of reading and kind of translating that to our young people. But
Yeah.
what was the rationale, I guess, for kind of splitting up into literally 100, they're not lesson plans, I'm not going to do them disservice in that way, but kind of 100 bite-sized ideas for kind of sharing this love of reading? Like what was the rationale behind that?
I suppose, like you said, is in terms of a lot of educational books or things like that I've read before are quite dense. They're quite heavy. They're quite theoretical and literal. And I wanted to give something that was more sort of practically based, and sort of not share my secrets per se. Some might call them that, but I have gathered such a wealth of knowledge, strategies, tips, ideas that can be used practically, and really I wanted to share that really with other teachers, because my passion really throughout my years of teaching has been learning and sharing from others, and I do want to sort of give that back and help teachers who are out there looking for fresh ideas and approaches. And it's not just really about creating that reading for pleasure culture either. It's about, if you've got it already in place, it's about helping continue that as well. And I think what's really also interesting is particularly the timing of the book, because there's been recent sort of statistics really that have revealed that reading for pleasure among children is currently at its lowest levels in 18 years, which I think is a really sort of troubling trend that's happening. But one I think we can really combat against with the right tools, the right approaches. And that's really where I hope my book can sort of play a pivotal part in it, because really the amount of reading that, well, I always talk about, we live in sort of such of a golden age of children's literature, that there's so many authors, so many talented authors, diverse, inclusive books that are out there at the moment that really aren't getting a look in. If you think of the books on the supermarket shelves that you see, or the books that lots of children read because they're either bought them or they know them, or because their parents know them, or adults know them, and adults are often the gatekeepers of the books they have. And really it's about sort of helping teachers to build up that knowledge, those tips, those ideas that really they can just drop into lessons or try out or adapt and play about with themselves. And there'll be ideas in the book really that they've done already in their schools. There'll be some new ideas. There'll be some radical ideas, I like to call them, because I am a bit of a maverick in that respect as well, where I kind of like trying different ideas out and experimenting for myself. And some of the ideas in the book, I've certainly done that in my own classrooms in my school myself. So yeah, really, it's a combination of sort of sharing and promoting, or a lot of the things that I've done in my own classrooms, and taking them out almost as a ripple effect, really, because I've had the ripple effect in my school. But I want to share that on a wider level across the country. But also the timing. I think the timing of the book is quite sort of significant, really.
I think you're right. I think we always try and steer clear a little bit of political agendas, but that with everything that's going on, which we will swing back a little bit to later on with you being a teacher in Wales, is the idea that there are so many people out there at the moment that are, I wouldn't say ultra critical, but there is a growing underbelly, is that right, of people that are kind of saying, well, you should do this as a teacher and you should do that. And there's been a lot of talk on our own podcasts and social media channels at Teachers Talk Radio about how there are a lot of people out there that are very quick to criticize and to suggest ideas, but are kind of quite far removed from the the classroom and the kind of education sector in general, really. And I think, if I'm honest, with you and anyone listening here, I don't tend to read, I say instruction manuals, because this book isn't an instruction manual, but
No.
there's a lot of good ideas here. I won't read anything unless it's someone who is currently teaching or is involved in a education setting, because unless you're living and breathing it, there's kind of not a lot of point. I get those people are useful in terms of teacher training and everything else, but for a book of this magnitude and what it brings to the classroom, the fact that you're still teaching incredibly a 5 and 6 mixed class and producing work like this is quite phenomenal, really. And I guess when I was kind of looking through it, the teaching tips and the kind of the taking it further ideas that are in the book, I kind of was able to reflect on my own practice as a reading teacher. So I don't have a class at the moment, but I am obviously still in a school every single day.
Yeah.
And I cover reading classes every now and again. But when I was a class teacher consistently in Key Stage 2, I never really felt confident with what I was doing in reading. I never really felt like I was kind of trying to get the enthusiasm across, but I never really felt like the techniques that I was giving were kind of having like the effect that I wanted them to, particularly in year 6, where I always found it very difficult. I know colleagues found it difficult as well to kind of keep that motivation and excitement and literally that reading for pleasure as your book kind of focuses on, because year 6 is a lot about, right, here's this, we spend all year doing these really amazing texts, and then you get a SATs question about bees or the Victorian plague or something, and it just destroys kind of almost the things that you built up all the way through the previous sort of 6-7 months doing. So I mean, in terms of the people you work with and the CPD that you run and everything else, do you have kind of teachers like me that are a little bit not unsure of what they're doing, but feel like they're not getting across what they need to in terms of reading?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And definitely, I think even if you read my book as well, I want you to sort of disagree with ideas. And like you said, if you've read through it and it's made you reflect on your practice, then really that's sort of part of the mission really of me writing it, was to make teachers think deeper or think creatively or think differently really about the ways that they put reading for pleasure into their classrooms, or even just think, yeah, maybe there's just a snippet of an idea there that I'll take and I'll change it myself completely. But the way that I'll sort of incorporate into my classroom will be very much my own. But that's given me a sort of nugget or something just to hook myself onto, really. It's almost giving teachers that reassurance. And I certainly needed that reassurance in the early stages of my career as well. And there's definitely, I think because the book belongs to the sort of popular 100 Ideas series of books published by Bloomsbury. And I think these books are very, very good in giving the teachers that confidence, that reassurance, that almost confirmation that what they're doing is right, and to have the confidence to run with it as well.
I mean, it's interesting you talk about inspiration and sort of past teachers and an early career as well, because, in your acknowledgements, you mentioned some of the teachers that you've had. In terms of those people, we've got Mrs. Davis, Mr. Kent, Mrs. Carter Evans. That's a great Welsh name, that is, Carter Evans. And obviously, to everyone else, these people won't mean anything, but to you, they've clearly had a massive impact. And I guess really that's the key, isn't it? In terms of reflecting on your own schooling experience, you clearly had people that kind of imparted their enthusiasm for reading. You obviously talked about you being from a reading background, working in the library as well. So, I mean, how important is that kind of hand down love of literature for, not just for you as a practitioner, but for any other teacher, but also really for, this current generation where you said earlier, it's books are almost kind of, gate kept by adults and other people. Kind of how important is that kind of traditional pass down of reading and the love of reading for you?
Completely. And what I would say as well is that even though I've had sort of all this sort of background of literature, a love of reading, thanks to my parents, not just having books at home, but taking me to libraries and things like that, I would also say that I can approach, and this is what I think helps me in the classroom as well, is that personally I've fallen out with reading myself as well. So I think I can come at it sort of from both angles. But like you said, the teachers that I've had, Mrs. Davis, for instance, was my reception teacher. So even thinking of, what am I now, 30? So 25, 26 years ago, the influence that somebody can have from that early age to set you on the path is phenomenal. And I think basically there's an idea in my book called idea is number 38, when it's called reading role models. And I think having reading role models in your life is huge. Whether that be your parents, your earliest role models, your teachers, or somebody else, somebody from your community, another classmate even, if you're looking at it from sort of a pupil angle, or somebody you aspire to. And I comment on that in the in the book as well. Maybe that's a famous figure, or maybe it's just somebody you look up to, somebody that you know. And I think seeing them and the ways that they interact with reading can play a massive, massive part. I can remember, for instances, my mum and dad both had very different outlooks on reading. And my grandparents, even further still. It's almost like a family tree of reading, and it goes off in different directions. But even just their regular interactions with books, seeing books around the house, seeing a newspaper, my grandfather reading a newspaper. Even now, when you see people reading on their phone, although it's a thing that maybe we sort of hasten and we criticize people for, it is reading. And that is sort of the first steps to showing children, particularly, that reading, the influence on reading can be life-changing.
It's funny, isn't it, about that kind of the physical element of reading. And
yeah,
I remember we had I must have been second or third year teaching, and we had this new teacher who was the reading lead. It was great, to be honest with you. She was really, really good. And she was like, right, what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that we model reading. And everyone was like, okay, so, guided reading or whatever. She's like, no, you're going to have sessions in the week where you literally bring in your own book that's, appropriate for school or whatever. And you sit there and you model the reading to the children. And it was one of those things where you could see, like, some of the older teachers kind of thinking this is just madness, like this is just another one of those bouts. But actually, it's something that I've, periodically, I guess, kind of dipped in and out of. I probably should have done it more often, really. But it was just an interesting idea in terms of them saying, well, you got to model it. You got to show them that you're interested. You got to show them that you're actually making the time in your day to be able to model and show children that actually it's, it's a really important thing, really. So yeah, I mean, I just remember that, that kind of CPD staff Twilight session, whatever you want to call it, and everyone just be like, okay, so what people that didn't read were kind of scrabbling around for a book and all the rest of it. So yeah, it's quite amusing, really. So you've talked, you talked very, very heavily, and it's very, very clear, not just in the acknowledgements, but throughout the book as well, the kind of the ethos that you're going through in terms of the inspiration of the book. But from a kind of a practical element of getting this book from, literally your brain and your ideas to, having a physical copy that I've got in my hands right now. What was the process like in terms of you going, right, this is what I'm going to do. I've got this idea. Off we go. Like, talk us through that kind of start to finish, if you can.
Yeah, it can be sort of very overwhelming, I guess, sort of thinking how I've got this like filing cabinet of ideas in my head, and I just want to put it all into a book. Job done. No, it doesn't quite work like that. But the one thing that really attracted me sort of working with Bloomsbury and this 100 Ideas series was that I love structure. And this book gives me structure in leaps and bounds. The ideas are structured in the way they're sort of formatted, presented, the way the inclusion, because within the ideas, like you've talked about, there's 100 ideas in the book. But inside them, then again, it should sort of be called 100 plus ideas, I guess, because there's teaching tips, there's taking it further insights, and there's also sort of bonus ideas, really, to take those ideas then to the next level or to further them, really. And basically, I like sort of compartmentalizing things. And the way I sort of compartmentalized this book was I developed sort of a roadmap, really, what I call my reading roadmap. And it sits really at the heart of my book. And as you've spoken about, it's really those 5 elements. It's a sort of 5-point framework, really, that serves as the foundation for all the ideas and provides a sort of thoughtful, intentional approach to implementing them. So it's made up of concentric circles, and it goes outwards, really, and then comes back in. And it starts on one side with the reading children, then up to reading teachers, reading leaders, reading schools, and reading communities. But the arrows go up on the left-hand side, and then they sort of come back down on the right-hand side, back to the reading children. And I think...
Interrupt you there, sorry. Did you physically draw that out when you were planning this?
A little bit, yeah. I sort of had the idea for it, and then it was almost like that ripple effect, like throwing the stone in the pond and watching it go. And I wanted to think about how reading really is in the hands of the children. That's how I like to see it. If it's not in the hands of the children, then really it's not going to grow for them or grow further out into schools. If it's sort of been something that's done purely by teachers or purely by leaders, it doesn't really work. It has to be sort of in the hearts and the minds of the children, really, to start with. And then it can be pushed out into the teachers, the leaders, into the schools, and then into the communities, and then sort of almost trickle back down, because the effects of the reading community lends itself then to you read in schools and then back down into the reading children. It almost plays that cyclical part, really. So yeah, I did almost sort of draw it out, not to the nice presented way that Bloomsbury have done it lovely so in the book, but yeah.
It's, I mean, one of the things that I keep saying since I left the classroom, what I mean is I don't have a class of my own. So obviously I have teacher responsibilities, but it's not, I don't have a class of 30 children that I am directly responsible day in, day out, like you guys that are still teaching. And one of the things that I've really thought about, since I've had more of a kind of a whole school overview, is actually, and it sounds really obvious, and to you, you probably roll your eyes at this, but when you're in it, it's difficult to reflect on what you're doing with reading. So, you talk a lot about, there's a section about, let me just find it quickly so I actually paraphrase it right. The part about having reading as the community. Where is it? Let's have a look. Engaging with your reading environment. That's it. And it really made me think about, the last class I had. I worked really hard to kind of push the books that we had. We had a new reading lead in at the school I'm at now, and she was actually on the show a couple of weeks ago. Fantastic reading lead, really good ideas, great enthusiasm, like you really. But actually, like, what is the reading environment about, and is it, are the children in the middle of that? Are they dictating? So I say, right, I need to go and get books. Am I just choosing those from a list of a popular website that I won't mention just yet, or am I literally asking them? How is that process?
Yeah.
And that section, part 9. Stuff like door displays, front facing, making reading visible, reading places and spaces. And there's been so much talk about classroom environments, but actually what are you doing? Not you, but generally in terms of teachers, what are you doing to create that reading environment, that love of reading? Are you putting children at the heart of that and saying, okay, what books do you like? Because it's such a personal thing, isn't it? And I can remember, parents' evenings and talking about reading and saying, look, the children need to be having a range of almost like a varied diet of reading, all the rest of it. And, there's a lot of popular franchises out there that kids absolutely love, like my own children love as well. Yeah. And I look at the pleasure that they get from them. And I kind of shudder to think to myself, why did I tell parents and children to stop reading a certain genre book because they absolutely loved it? Like, why was I almost forcing them to go, right, you got to go and read not War and Peace, but something completely different? Like, why was I doing that? That should have been coming from me as a reading teacher. Do you kind of find that it's natural to you to put children at the heart of reading processes, or is it something that you have to stop and think about? Because obviously we've all got tastes. I like to read non-fiction. I read a lot of history books, but like you said about falling out with a genre of reading. Do you find that you're able to engage those children regularly in what they're reading and how they're reading, or is it something that is almost kind of you have to stop and think about it?
I suppose if you'd asked me this question years ago, I probably would have said yes. I probably do find it hard, but the more I've read children's literature, the more my sort of genres, formats, sort of exposure to just the whole range of children's literature has massively widened and increased myself. And now, like, I find myself reading books that probably years ago I might have sort of cast aside or not really given the time of day. Whereas now, I always have this sort of unwritten rule as well about giving a book, particularly a fiction book, sort of 80 to at least 100 pages for the plot to get going and to have patience with a book. And these are all skills and sort of attributes I've learned. And I really hope that through my sort of teaching practice and through the book as well, that I've sort of passed on these skills really to children about sort of developing that patience, developing all those skills like empathy and consideration for characters and different genres and different writing styles. And that, yes, some will like, some will dislike. And as well, another point that I really want to make as well is it's not just about discussing sort of the preferences of what we like in classrooms either. It is about considering what we don't like and the reasons why we don't like certain books and different genres or writing styles or sort of plots of books and themes of books and things like that as well. So yeah, I suppose you could say that in my early sort of career, I would have found it maybe harder than I do now. But I think the more you read, the more sort of that sort of widening of the sort of pool of children's literature helps you sort of come around to the fact that there is something out there for everybody, and I firmly believe that.
I mean, kind of building on that, obviously it is a sponsored show about a book, and I want to read a little bit of your book aloud, if that's okay.
Yeah,
Not to the
yeah,
people
yeah.
have to buy it, but it's idea number one is literally called Children's Choice.
Yeah.
Right, it's the very first on page 2 of the book. That is the very first idea of 100. And the quote at the top says, "Everyone feels included when we choose our class book. It's so exciting to see who wins." Okay, that's the quote. And then you go on to say, "As a child, do you remember teachers reading books to the class? Do you remember voting for that book choice? Your first answer will hopefully be yes, but your second will probably be no. But how transformational would it have been for you to have had the power to pick the class book?" And that, that for me, almost sealed the deal with the book, because actually it's we'll come back to the process in a minute, so we can tease a bit more up. But it's very, very clear to me that all of this book is kind of common practice to you and the setting that you're in currently, and how giving ownership not just to the teachers and the staff, but to the children, and saying, okay, how are we going to read this? And the point you just made about encouraging children to say, I don't like this because, is such a powerful thing. Realistically, we're desperate to get opinions out of children anyway, but actually when you're doing, when you're creating a culture where it's okay to say, do you know what, this book is terrible because of X, Y, Z, and that's my opinion, or I don't like this book because the character is, blah, blah, blah. It's absolutely vital. And so having the children in right in the center of that is, permeates through this book that you've written. I mean, when you were coming up with these ideas, were they definitely all things that you did, or were they things that you thought, actually, I really want to do this, but I'm going to get it in the book and then try it? Did you, did you actually ask any of your class or children in your setting about these ideas? Like, did you kind of seek any other opinions on what you were putting in this book, or was this kind of stuff that you just do as your kind of common practice?
So a lot of it is based on my common practice, no doubt. Like what you've said, thinking about 100 ideas and trying to actually put them into practice. I have pretty much, I think, tried almost pretty much all of them. But like I said, in those acknowledgements, like a lot of my inspiration has definitely come from the children and putting them at the center of it. And I think pretty much, like, if I look back through the book, I'm struggling to think of one that I haven't at least tried. Maybe not, like some of the ideas I've tried really wide scale on a sort of whole school level. Others I've tried very sort of classroom based level. Some I've tried individually with children. Others I've tried sort of maybe a bit off the cuff. So they haven't been sort of in their fully form as I've put here, or sort of in their extended form with their taking it further ideas or teaching tips, but they have been sort of rooted in that practice. But yeah, like you've made me sort of reflect on my practice now, and I'm struggling to think of one that I haven't really had some sort of experience in. So yeah, they are, like I said, they are pretty much proven, practical, and tried and tested, as the Bloomsbury sort of do call them in the book. So yeah.
Well, that's good. That's what we want to do at Teach Talk Radio. We want everyone to reflect in it in a positive way and change. And as I said earlier, this book definitely made me reflect. I mean, one of the ideas, I'm going to call, not things, we're going to call them ideas, because that's how it's listed in your book. Was number 56. That was the reading assemblies. Yeah. And I actually, I've, for obvious reasons, I've started doing a lot more assemblies. And a couple of years ago, we had an issue where it's only a small thing, but there was children that were forgetting their please and thank yous in the dinner hall, and holding doors open and stuff like that. And rather than kind of stand up and go, right, everyone's being rude or whatever, you know, like that classic sort of 1970s kind of senior leader in a primary school. I read them. I can't remember the author, but it's a cracking book. It's called Please, Mr. Panda, and it's about a
Oh
donut.
yeah, Steve Anthony. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And it's really matter of fact, right? But it's
Yeah,
also
yeah,
very visual. And I was like, I'm just going to read this, and I mean, I'm not going to blow my own trumpet, but it actually worked. Like
yeah,
it was probably one of the better assemblies I'd done up until that point, because you know, as you mentioned here, reading assemblies help everyone look at, listen to, and love books in our school. And not only was it getting reading across, but it was also getting the message that I wanted across.
yeah.
And ever since then, like, you know, one of my all-time favorite books for children is The Selfish Crocodile, because I love the artwork. I did a project on it when I was training to teach, did a whole like story sack around it. But it's just a great book, and I
Yeah.
always like to kind of to start the academic year and kind of end the academic year with that book as well, as a kind of a consistency thing.
Yeah.
But those reading assemblies, you know, in that section that you've titled "Setting Up a Reading School," are absolutely vital, because I think, you know, there's a tendency there with, you know, with things like World Book Day, which have become, you know, almost a caricature of themselves these days, with the whole dressing up thing and the tokens and everything else. Again, I'm not dissing it, but it's just become a massive thing.
Hmm.
And I say that now as a parent as well as as well
Yeah.
as an educator. But you know, that kind of idea about having reading representatives, the kind of the whole school reading spine, the whole school books, you know, reading
Hmm.
representation, all that sort of stuff, you know, book mapping, which is so important, but again, sounds like such an obvious thing, but there are so many schools that don't do it.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, in terms of having these, have you given a copy or kind of shared copies with this with your, you know, with the staff in your setting, and have they kind of started to act upon some of the things you put in this book, or have you still yet to do that?
Yeah, yeah. What I'd love to do is is give a staff training day, but I'm not at that stage yet. But yeah, definitely. And I sort of like a lot of the ideas sort of they'll be familiar with anyway, because like I've either drip fed them in, or just like with you, like when you said about reflecting on your practice. I don't really like say that, oh, this is idea number so and so, I think you should put this into practice. But yeah, I think it's almost just like almost assisting them in their ways of different ways of thinking, rather than just thinking sort of like you said, here's the books, I've been told to put these into my classroom, or I've been told to show reading in this way. It's almost just like, I don't know, just like inspiring them in a bit of a different way, in just like making them think differently, making them think a bit more creatively. And I almost just like sort of seeing like it's almost like a planting a seed really, and seeing it grow, and I like seeing the ways that they take the ideas basically and run with them, and the ways that they adapt them, because they come up with their own sort of ways of either incorporating them into their practice or making them better, which ultimately really authors always say that once the book is published, it's in the reader's hands. And I do hope that teachers do take them and take them and use them in their own ways as well. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, well, let's talk a little bit about that. I mean, I will share with you, because I think you need to know, because you've written the book, kind of my favorite parts of the book, and
Yeah.
what I've really enjoyed, you know, particular sections. But in terms of how you want, or not want, but would like and hope that teachers in the primary sector use your book, which is out now in all available bookshops, I believe, and popular websites, very popular websites, in fact, through Bloomsbury. Kind of, how do you want, or how do you hope people reading this book will use it?
So really, as it says, really, like people say, don't judge a book by its cover, but the cover pretty much speaks for itself with 100 ideas for primary teachers. But in a way, I hope really that the book's accessibility is an advantage, in that it's not just useful for primary school teachers, and this is what people have commented on recently, is the fact that other educators in school settings are using them, people like teaching assistants, school librarians. And I also think that beyond just being sort of a guide for individuals for raising their own sort of levels of professional development, that it can sort of provide that, be a catalyst of sort of for providing that wider professional learning, and using it as basis for sort of things like whole school training days, and hoping that staff really rather than sort of treat reading in isolation and them all doing different things at different times and hoping that it has this effect, is the fact that my book is almost like the overarching way of bringing staff together to collaborate, explore, discuss the ideas, sort of assess which ones are suitable for their classes, their children, the school as a general, and the school community as well, and hoping to create then that shared vision together to promote reading for pleasure in a sort of bigger, more community focused and sort of collaborative way, I suppose. And as I said, like in the book, I've spoken that teachers can use it really to sort of add to their reading lessons and reading curriculums. There are many ideas in there about different ideas as well, things to do with looking at extracurricular activities to inspire children to read for pleasure. But I don't think, as I've said, the book's benefits stop there. And I think school leaders looking to promote a culture of reading in their schools can also find invaluable guidance in its pages. It's not really just for one sort of role in the school. It is for more of a holistic approach to promoting both reading inside and outside of the school as well. So, yeah.
I mean, that is a really good point. And again, it's you're not just here giving sound bites. It is honestly, for those people that haven't read the book or seen it yet, that is a really clear message in this book. And particularly my favourite parts of it. I mean, it's obviously all good, but certainly the ones that really resonated with me are obviously the ones I've already said. But part 7, cultivating a reading community. There's idea 84 is the drives and donation schemes. And there's a bit about imagine a child that's doesn't have access to the books or whatever at home.
Yeah.
And I distinctly remember a couple of years ago, my mum, who was a teacher and from an educating background, who I actually interviewed on this very show a few months back. She was working as a family worker for a local council, and she said that there were parents and families come into this, the kind of sessions that she was doing. First, they didn't have any books at home, and secondly, they didn't know how to share books when they were given the opportunity. So she'd literally do a session on that, in terms of modelling what that looks like to the parents and the children as well. And Idea 84 kind of taps home a little bit on that. This idea that but we know everything's expensive, right? You breathe and it costs you £10 or whatever, but actually, getting books to schools is a really big deal. And when you're looking at current school budgets at the moment, books are expensive, right? They really are. And I know our school has been very lucky. We've signed up with Magic Breakfast, who kind of every so often drop a set of books for a class and all the rest of it, and that's lovely. But it only goes so far. So having this idea of kind of drives and donations, as you say, on Idea 84 is fantastic because, as you just said, people reading this book, you don't have to be a teacher. You don't even have to be in the classroom. If you're picking this book up from an education background and you work in an education setting, the idea of setting up, a kind of a book donation at school is absolutely vital. And I think as well, one of the things that because it's vital that, as you said, parents model what that behaviour is like. So if they haven't got access to books or appropriate reading material themselves, set up a book swap for parents in school. That's really, really key. So I think there are so many bits in here that people can use. And the other section that I thought was brilliant was the part 10, the participating with parents and families, because as we all know, people working in school, they're your main crowd, right? You get them on side and you can do anything. It's a partnership. So, I mean, looking at that section, there's parent partners, parents' evenings, report on reading, and then reading workshops.
Yeah.
In terms of those reading workshops, and it's something that I'm going to be really selfish here, and I'm going to pick your brains about. It's Idea 96, and you say reading workshops are a great way to grow as a reading school and community. How do you run those in your school? How have you run those previously, and what kind of things are you doing to promote that love of reading through these kind of workshops?
So I think with running reading workshops is a good question, because I think most people think of sort of the sort of stereotypical way of running sort of any after school event really is after school. It's cheers in the hall, listening to a teacher present. But no, it doesn't have to be like that at all. And I think time is of the essence. You can run reading workshops where they sort of coincide with other events that already have sort of parental involvement in schools. So you could have sort of things going on when parents are in school for parents' evenings, for open doors afternoons. Any way of getting parents into school can be linked to a reading workshop. Again, the reading workshops don't have to be, as I call them, didactic, where teachers are talking to parents just to stood at the front presenting. They can be more sort of interactively based. They can be sort of more sort of, I suppose, sharing rather than just introducing something or, like I said, presenting on something. And I do think that having that sort of relationship with parents, building this reading workshop, it does sort of encourage parents to come in. It does help them educate them on what the school is doing with reading, but it also shows the sort of difficulties and challenges that parents have at home. And it's about sharing reading from both sides, what the school is doing and sending home, but what is happening at home and how that's sort of being impacted on in school, really. And I think sort of balancing those two things is what really reading workshops helps with. And like I said, really, is to help families feel more sort of familiar with understanding how children are learning to read in the classroom, but also what they're reading. And I think that's a really good point as well, is the fact that sometimes we might be aware of what children are picking up in our classrooms to read, but then teachers might not be aware of what actually children are reading at home. And sometimes they can be reading less, as we often know, but sometimes they could be reading more, and sometimes they can be reading authors and books that we know nothing about as teachers. And it's about having that mutual understanding and that mutual sort of, I suppose, building of understanding as well in terms of reading workshops.
I mean, there is so much stuff out there, isn't there? And I sometimes wonder whether it's kind of, with these workshops, it's best to kind of go, well, okay, this is how we teach reading at XYZ school, or actually, you're getting, who's your target audience for the reading workshops, I guess, are you getting those parents of children that just want to read all the time? Is it a kind of a shared experience, as you said, where you're saying, well, tell me what they're reading at home, like what what's their bookshelf looking like, what do you need more of, what do you need less of, that kind of stuff. And also, like, are they not only enjoying it, but are they understanding what they're reading? Because I mean, I'm lucky in the fact that both my children are, I wouldn't say prolific readers, but they read every night. I suppose that is prolific, isn't it?
Yeah,
I suppose
yeah.
when I think about how much I read and how much they read, then I suppose it would be prolific, really. But they're into a lot of kind of a range of books, really, which I think is a good thing. But at times they've brought a school book home and they've not really been enjoying it, and I just think, well, okay, we'll just put that aside and we'll read something different, because it's the enjoyment factor, and it's like anything in education and classes. Children have got to enjoy what they're doing.
Absolutely, yeah.
So it's a really good point about that kind of the reading workshops, and how it's probably not the best way to just stand there and dictate what's going on and kind of the reactions that you want, really. I mean, in terms of this book, it might be a tough question for you to answer, but what would you say was your kind of your favorite part or your favorite idea in terms of putting ideas down on paper? Like which bit are you most kind of like, yeah, do you know what that is? That's my favorite part. That's my favorite idea that I will always go back to, if you have one, of course.
Yeah, it's very hard to pick just one. I think in terms of, I think if I had to sort of choose one as a whole, it would be sort of recognizing all reading. And as we've talked about, having that varied range of a diet of books, but also considering not just sort of the wide sort of scope of reading in terms of fiction, non-fiction, poetry, picture books, graphic novels, but also things like alternative formats, like sort of dyslexia friendly and super readable books, which is another idea I mentioned in the book, audiobooks, ebooks, any ways of recognizing that reading happens as a whole. That's one of them. And another one, I suppose I would definitely as well put on that same sort of platform as well, is about having that representation of reading. I think I talk about to help children see themselves on the shelves. And I think one way of getting children to pick up a book is to help them see themselves on the shelves, in the fact that that teachers should be knowledgeable and have a deep understanding about different books that are out there, in terms of and considering really the diversity of people and places portrayed within them, the representation of ages, disabilities, genders, races, religions, sexual orientations, socioeconomic status, as we've already talked about, to help children realize that they can find themselves and their own place, their own heart, their own mind, really, in a book, and to make sure that that representation really is authentic and respectful towards them as well. Because if we do that, really, it becomes that integral part of our school and our integral part of reading as a whole, rather than just honoring it maybe as a tokenistic gesture, which I know that doesn't that just really ticks a box. It doesn't really show the children that we sort of accept everybody in terms of reading, and that's what reading is all about, really, accepting everybody, whether they like reading, they dislike reading, and the whole spectrum completely throughout that scope.
Yeah, I mean, that's a stunning point, isn't it? You know, children need to, in the same way that, you know, films and other media they consume, they need to see themselves in the books, and they need to kind of go, okay, well, you know, this character's got this particular problem or this particular obstacle to overcome, or from the same background as me or whatever. So yeah, I mean, that is a really good point. And I think, you know, I was thinking about it the other day in terms of what, you know, because most classes and most schools have a situation where they're called, you know, after a name of a certain author, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when you analyze, you know, the gender and ethnic background of those authors, is quite telling. And you know, it's something that I think schools are really, really aware of now, and should be aware of, and should have always been aware of. But you know, there is a developing narrative, which is a positive thing, around the representation, identity of who's writing these books and where they're coming from. So I think that's a really, really good point. Before we kind of step away from the book a little bit and kind of loop back to you, in terms of what you do in life generally, the bit I really liked as well was idea 63 about book club. And it's funny because I laugh because I just associate book club with my mother-in-law, who does it with WI. And there's always this mad panic where she's had like 2 or 3 weeks to read the book and she hasn't finished it or whatever, and she's always stressing about the fact she hasn't read it or she didn't like it. So I actually really like the idea of the book club, and it's really, really simple, but actually, you know, having children that, you know, let's be realistic, that there are going to be children in the class that don't like reading and don't find it difficult and find it a struggle, as with maths or science or anything else in the curriculum. But actually having like a targeted group of children that are like really want to be there and are really engaged in it and kind of reading through this book aloud, I thought was a really, really nice idea. So yeah, it's there were some fantastic pieces in it. Honestly, you've done a really, really good job on kind of producing it, and certainly for me, you know, I enjoyed reading it, and it's given me a really good opportunity to reflect on my own kind of reading, teaching historically, and also kind of moving forward as well. So we're gonna come back to the book in a little bit, but first, just kind of wanted to talk a little bit about you again, really, Scott, if that's okay, in terms of how you are able to fulfill all these roles. You know, you're you know, you've got family, obviously, you know, from a very strong reading background, class teacher, and you're now a published author. So how do you juggle all of those things with kind of the rest of your life? You know, what is your kind of life work balance like? How are you able to do all those things, basically? Because you've got a lot on your plate.
Yeah. I suppose in terms of sort of juggling my work as an author with the book and sort of the rest of my life, as you say, the book actually came quite naturally to me. As I said, like, it's grounded in sort of real life practice. And so really the words did come quite naturally. So in that respect, I really feel like the book is almost just sort of a manifestation of really my sort of career so far. But like, I do honestly think that work-life balance is essential. And I in my early career, I put so much sort of pressure on myself as a teacher, and I really feel like I probably was very, very close to burnout in my first year of teaching. And that wasn't coming from the school, it wasn't coming from senior leadership, it was coming from me with the expectations of sort of teaching and things like that. So I've really sort of learned that when I got that far and that close to burnout, that I really needed to sort of, well, take my foot off the gas, really, in that respect, in the fact that I was very much sort of a perfectionist in that way. I was held myself very much, I held myself to high standards anyway, but even more so within the first year, I wanted everything to be how the teaching looked and how it appeared and how it was this perfect lesson plan done and reflection on teaching, marking perfect. And it couldn't. I realized quite quickly that it couldn't be like that. And in a way, this is why I produced the book, because this is how my mind works, in the fact that I needed short, insightful, bite-sized pieces. And really, that's how I sort of juggle my life, really, in the fact that I need to break things down into small parts, achievable parts. And that's what I hope the book is. It feels very much achievable for people to put into practice. But also I feel like that it's about sort of finding things that make you feel good about yourself as well, whether that's in teaching. Although I soon learned that I had to find other things outside of teaching, and that those things to me were about finding enjoyment and time for having my hobbies back. Writing was a hobby. Definitely, I would say writing was a hobby, although at times during the book, maybe it didn't feel quite the hobby that I wanted it to be, particularly when I had deadlines approaching. But yeah, I just feel like that. I think it was almost a bit about sort of realizing almost what the image of teaching had become for me, and that it was very close to not being the reality of what it was. So yeah, I really think that juggling things is good, and I've managed to slightly juggle, but I had to sort of prioritize a lot of the other stuff as well as teaching, and almost take my foot off it before it became too much.
I mean, that is an interesting point about the image and the reality. And I think, listening to you talk, without sounding patronising in any way, I've been teaching 15 years, 16 years. I always lose a year. I always have this. The amount of times I'm asked how long I've been, in education, and it's the only job I've ever had. But my point, rather than me rambling, what I'm going on to say is that my wife is a teacher as well, and I distinctly remember, because that's how we met in terms of teacher training, and we would spend the whole of Sunday working, I think, and we would sit there at the dining room table. We'd mark sets of books and we'd do plan and all the rest of it, and then we'd still be working in the evenings. And I don't know what happened. I think maybe because we had kids or we just couldn't be bothered anymore. But at one point we just went, "This has got to stop. It's just ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous." And it wasn't even our schools putting that expectation. As you said earlier, it's like you putting the expectation on yourself, and at some point it's going to go, if this is what I'm going to do, for the rest of my working life, which, is hopefully what I do, because I love what I do, and clearly you do as well. You've got to stop, right? You've got to just go, no, that's you. What is the point of working a whole day of a weekend when you should be, resting or binging on Netflix or whatever it is that you do at the weekend, right? So, I mean, it's crazy, really. And I guess, what people like you prove is that you can be an effective, and I'm not going to use the Ofsted gradings like we used to. You can be an effective and efficient and, whatever classroom teacher, and produce, kind of literature that you've done in terms of this, 100 ideas for a primary teachers book, but, not actually burn yourself out. And I think it's so important that, that teachers, potentially younger teachers or ECTs as they're called now, listen to this, understand that you've got to get that life work balance right. You have to make sure that if you've got a passion, it's brilliant, and doing the job is great, and it's a calling or whatever you want to call it. Some people do, some people don't, but actually having that balance between, you can enjoy it, but you can invest it in other ways as well. And that's obviously exactly what you've done, Scott, in terms of producing this, this fantastic book. And I guess really the next question is, how have you found kind of being a published author? Have you got your own car parking space at school now? Do people bring you limitless coffee? Have you been given extra PPA? Like, how does it work at your school?
Extra PPA, that's the dream, eh?
I know, right?
No, I haven't been fanned with leaves and have a crown yet. No, no. I just love seeing the book. Like, to me, I went to an event at Hay Festival last year, and I watched an author called Phil Earle, and he spoke really about something called the happiness trap. And it was always about, I'll be happy if, or I'll be happy when this happens. And the chain can keep on going. I'll be happy when I publish a book. I'll be happy when it sells this many. I'll be happy when I write another one. And you're always just constantly chasing happiness. And I realized then that actually, maybe I was. And really, happiness to me is seeing the book in its finished form. And I know that might sound very sort of idyllic, that because many people don't get that sort of achievement of seeing a book in it with their name on the front cover. But for me, that is sort of it. That is it surmised perfectly in the fact that I look at it and I get heart-eyed emojis. So yeah.
I mean, talking of those emojis, you know, you're very, very active on social media. I'm looking at your Twitter page now. And for those people that have not yet tapped into Scott, it's at Mr. E Primary. And the M for Mr. is capital. And the E, I think it's all on our social media as well, but it's Mr. E Primary. So he'll be on there, and he's the reader teacher. He's got a blue tick as well. We won't say any more about that. But, you know, he's got 32.3 thousand followers. And I mean, you know, you're very, very active on here, and I'm just scrolling through. Obviously, you've retweeted what we're doing today, so thank you very much for that. But there's a lot of love for what you've been able to, you know, produce in terms of this Reading for Pleasure book, which is out now by Bloomsbury, our sponsor of the show. You know, there's a lot of good traffic in terms of people giving you good reviews and talking about it. But, you know, the interesting thing about that is it's not just a kind of, you know, a self-image Twitter page. It's kind of you recommending reading, you know, literature to other people, to give tips to other people. And it's really, really good to see that there's this kind of growing narrative, this you know, this developing conversation around not niche books for children, that's not the right word, but as you said earlier, you know, the representation, the different ideas, you know, your kind of reviews of those, and it's really, really positive. Do you know, based on the kind of success that you've had, not just on social media, because you can't judge someone with the success that they have on that, but in terms of the feedback and the kind of the way that the book is doing so well at the moment, do you have plans to write more and produce more books, or is that it for you?
I'd love to write and produce more books, definitely. It's not my sort of like ultimate goal really, but it definitely is sort of a vision that I have. I sort of, in primary school, I did struggle really with the sort of writing and composition of writing. It was always my bugbear of writing a story and me ending it with, it was a dream. That was my teacher's favorite last word. Don't write this ending. So to see my published book, first off, is amazing, but I would absolutely love to write more. And really, I just sort of love to share that passion. So the way that sort of I'm sort of putting that into practice now is by going and speaking about my book, like on here, or delivering sort of staff training sessions to teachers or keynotes to conferences and things like that. So yeah, I'm just big now on sort of, I suppose, promoting the book, but promoting it sort of by sharing that passion and sharing that advice. And I really hope that it sort of emanates really out of the pages and through me, really. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the point, you know, and anyone listening to this, either kind of now or on demand, this will be available on, you know, through our Pop-In account and our website that we've got. But, you know, it's very evident that you've got a, you know, huge passion for not just reading, but for teaching as well. And I guess, you know, from your point of view, you know, really sort of pushing the book and kind of sharing it really, because, you know, there's a lot of people out there that will just write things. And as I said at the start of the show, kind of not critique teaching, but, you know, this book doesn't do that. It's very much like these are some great ideas that you can run with and go from there.
Yeah.
Have you got kind of open channels for people to, you know, to feed back to you in terms of how things have gone with maybe, you know, utilizing the ideas you've got in this book, or is that still kind of in development at the moment?
Yeah, so basically what we've done together with Bloomsbury is that at the end of each idea, there's like an individualized hashtag for each idea. And I would love people to use that, share that on social media with me, and post pictures or ways that they've used the ideas, adapted them, changed them, so we can really share successes and share different ways of implementation in schools and give them feedback on them, and ways really that they've just enjoyed using them, I suppose, and I suppose like spread that word so they have a ripple effect and a community effect, really. So the book sort of goes beyond the boundaries of the book, really. So yeah.
Well, that's good. I mean, that having that conversation, that constructive conversation, because we all know social media can be a bit of a minefield. But
Mm-hmm.
actually, you having all these many thousands of followers, and also, as you said, having the hashtags at the bottom of the pages for each idea is great. It's really, really positive, and developing that conversation in a kind of constructive but supportive and ultimately achievable way is brilliant.
Yeah, and I
Um,
don't sort of just want to be the sort of um like the one who gives all the font of all knowledge, really. I want teachers to speak to other teachers about the ideas and say, oh, have you tried this, have you tried that, not just me sort of, it's my book, it's my idea. No, definitely not. It's everyone's ideas, really. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you say in your acknowledgements, that there's to all the teachers, teaching assistants, librarians, office and support staff, caretakers, cleaners, cooks, parents, families, schools, authors, illustrators, poets, booksellers, bloggers, organisations, and everyone else who have worked with an educational capacity. You clearly have a good team around you, and that's what you're encouraging with this book as well, in terms of developing these reading teams across particularly the primary education sector, because obviously this is geared for. For primary teachers. That's the name of the series that
Yeah.
we have at the moment. I mean, in terms of your wider community, because obviously you're from Wales, you're teaching in Wales at the moment. Without getting too political, and we can't really get away from it. What's the kind of the morale that you're sensing at the moment in terms of where teachers in Wales are at? Because I'd imagine, looking at the news and what's going on, it's probably a little bit different to where maybe teachers in England are at the moment. So
Yeah.
kind of give us a little bit of an insight into what it's like at the moment, kind of teaching in Wales.
So obviously we've kind of on both sides of the border, I suppose. We've been in sort of consultation about the strikes and the effects of the strikes, and obviously pay has taken up a major sort of place, I suppose, in the media, and how it's the sort of focused highlight, really, of all these discussions. But in Wales, we have sort of come to an end, I suppose, with the acceptance of the latest pay offer from the Welsh government. And again, that's come after sort of repeated discussions, so it hasn't just been a first time offer and they've backed down. But what's welcome, really, in the fact that we've been grateful for, really, is the teachers that our pay increase is fully funded. So, which is really welcome news, and it means we won't have to sort of divert funds from already stretched budgets. And obviously, as a teacher yourself, in schools are incredibly stretched, and seeing the situation unfold in England is almost like the contrary, I suppose, to what's happening in Wales. However, we can't really ignore the fact that in Wales, the resolution of the sort of pay dispute has left out an important group of people, in the fact that it's left out of teaching assistants. And it's really sort of disappointing to see that their contributions really haven't been recognised in the same way as those of teachers. Unions are really campaigning against sort of this, and raising the sort of fact that they're not acknowledged like teachers have been. And I'm fully behind the campaign for teaching assistants and support staff to have the same sort of pay rise, or at least a sort of significant pay rise to what they have, because we all know as teachers ourselves that the teaching assistants are invaluable members of the school community, and they help classrooms and schools run smoothly. We wouldn't be we'd be bereft without them, really. So yeah, I just think that although in Wales we're fairly happy with what we've got, we have sort of left out members of our own teaching profession, and I do really wish that sort of we'd come together more as a teaching profession in one union, maybe together, so we can galvanize and have that support together. And another thing, I think that really, as I've said about the pay dispute, really, in the fact that it's sort of just been sort of broadcast by the media that it's all about pay, when actually it's not, and it's about sort of recruitment, but more importantly, I think the critical issue of retention in our teaching profession. And we must remember that governments can and should really do more to reduce workload, as we've talked about, in terms of marking books and administrative tasks and things like that. That really the ever increasing workload of the job really is the thing that pushes many teachers to their limits. And it's pushed me to my limit in the fact that my first year I nearly had burnout. And I do really think that we should be preserving and prioritizing teachers' well-being and job satisfaction. So although we are generally happier in Wales, I suppose, at the moment in terms of things, there are still things and caveats of it to consider as well. So, yeah.
I think the key thing really is, with not having done a huge amount of research on what's going on in Wales, obviously you get the headlines. But, I think the fact that there's been a sensible discussion is probably the most stark contrast.
Yeah.
Again, these are just my personal opinions on what's happening here in England. But the fact that it's fully funded is, I say it's a blessing. It's one of those, isn't it? It should be par for the course, but we all know that's not the case. And when I did a kind of a rough imaginary budget in terms of running off whatever teachers in England were offered, but allegedly offered in inverted commas anyway.
Yeah.
The deficit was just absurd. It really was, and I think that's the key thing from a school leadership point of view, is that the minute the words fully funded come up, then that's exactly what you need. So I can't disagree with anything you've said. I think you've articulated that incredibly well. I think you spot on about the teaching assistants, because it's very, very difficult to. Well, it's impossible to run a school without support assistants, and they need pay parity as well. So it's good to hear in some respects that things are moving well for you guys. And will we get to that stage in England? I don't know. I'm not sure really.
I really hope, because my first year in university was in England, so I do have some relationship with the English education system. So I really do hope that the constructiveness of what's happened in Wales really does sort of is emulated really in England.
It's a difficult one, isn't it? And it's a very, very very topical point at the moment in terms of what's going to happen and how that's going to move forward. But it's good that in some respects, the governments have been able to kind of resolve that fairly swiftly and move forward and get everyone back to doing what they want to do, which is ultimately teach children and improve. But things have got to be better, as they have with junior doctors and everyone else. So it's going to be tricky to see how that one unfolds at the moment, really. And kind of away from teaching and away from writing books, what kind of stuff do you do? You kind of said that your life work balance was good, but what kind of hobbies have you got? What kind of interests do you have kind of away from the classroom and writing about books, or writing books about the classroom rather?
Obviously I love reading. That's a huge one, but then that's a very blurred boundary between when does it encompass work and when does it not.
So to interrupt you there, what are you reading at the moment? Like, what have you got? A couple of books on the go? Because I always imagine that authors literally just devour books like takeaways. Like, is that true, or do you just have one at a time? Do you kind of mix it up? How do you do that?
So I can't read many books on the go, because I will have as many plots as I'm reading swirling around in my head, the characters all intermixing, and it just being a complete nightmare. And they'll probably affect my dreams as well, which will definitely become a nightmare. But I know I'm reading one children's book at the moment, which is called Vivi Conway and the Sword of Legend by Lizzie Huxley Jones. It's not out until June the 1st, because I'm really lucky that I get advanced copies sent to me. And it's a fantastic book, purely because I have a sort of affliction with it, because it has definitely it's linked to Welsh mythology, so it couldn't be more up my street. But yeah, it's fantastic. I've pretty much only just started it in the sort of first 80 pages or so. So I'm waiting for the story to build and the characters to take shape. So really, really enjoying it. But yeah, in terms of books as a whole, I do devour books. As a child, and this is sort of what I was alluding to in the past, in sort of the early introduction of the conversation, is that I can read books exceptionally quickly. And I think I've sort of like self-diagnosed myself, but I think I was hyperlexic as a child because I can read an average sort of 300-page children's book in about 3 hours. I've got a reading rate of about 100 pages an hour. So which lots of people think, what?
100 pages an hour?
Yeah, yeah.
What, just
When I
like a
get,
standard paperback?
yeah. So this is
What's
why,
the
like,
average then? 100
I
pages an hour?
yeah. So bear in mind, like a children's book, I don't know, it's roughly what 40 to 50,000 words. So if we're thinking of that divided by 40,000 divided by 300 pages, that 133 words on a page ish.
Yeah,
So
probably. I
yeah,
don't know, but it sounds about right. Yeah, go on.
so yeah, I can read 100 pages about an hour if I'm on a good reading rate, and it's basically just taking it all in, and that obviously helps me with plowing through books, writing resources, and things like that. So yeah, like when I've said that to people before, they're like, "What?" But I literally, it's not even a case of skimming. It is I absorb everything, and this is why I find it really, really hard as well to reread books, because if I've reread something, I can sort of remember it very, very vividly as well. So yeah. But yeah, so that's reading for you. But in addition to reading, I like going to the gym regularly. I feel like that is a massive sort of influence, particularly on my mental health, let alone my physical health. And I recently, really, in the last sort of two or 3 years, have loved getting back into playing golf. I find the more I've got into golf, most people look at golf and think that's not a sport. It is. It's more than a sport. It challenges me both sort of physically, but also mentally as well. And I also find it really rewarding now that I've got a coach, and it's almost like I've applied what children do in the classroom when they're learning to me on my golf swing. That's how I see it now. It's a very much a learning process that is as far and as wide, really as broad and as deep as I want to take it. But I love sport. Sport's a major sort of passion of mine as well. I've always been into sport throughout my childhood. I've played tennis, football, sort of everything really. Badminton, I've had to go at sort of most sports. For being a fan, I do support Tottenham Hotspur. Although that's not been as enjoyable as it has been in the past with their recent results.
We've only got 9 minutes left, isn't it? Because I'd have ended that earlier.
Yep. And I have no idea where we're going to go as a football club soon, but yeah. But I also have a local team, which is Newport County. And they've basically seen their fair share of ups and downs as well. Most ups in sort of the FA Cup, they're known as the Giant Killers. Yeah. But as they say, I think with sort of supporting sports in general, it's the hope of victory that not only kills you, but keeps you coming back for more, no matter how pitiless that might be. But
true.
yeah.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, it's a cracking part of the world as well, kind of Newport and the surrounding area. It's, it has its reputations, but I've been to Newport a few times in terms of watching football, but also just one of my neighbours is from there and go down there regularly, and obviously from a Welsh background as well. So yeah, cracking part of the world, really.
I love living in Wales. I wake up and I see greenery. And you can literally go anywhere in Wales, north, south, east or west, and find something really to take your breath away. So I recommend everyone to come and visit. I literally could be the poster boy for Visit Wales. So yeah.
Well, this is it. Not only have we managed to promote your book, we've also promoted Wales now. So Visit Wales. It's,
there you go.
Mark Drayford will be loving you. I tell you,
yes.
Be delighted with what you're saying. Well, I mean, it's great to hear. All the things that you're doing away, because anyone kind of who's younger or earlier into the profession will need to know, without being that finger pointing older teacher, but you have to get your life in order in terms of doing stuff that you want to do as well as teaching. And it's an interesting point you made about learning about the golf, because I always feel like the best teachers are the ones that are actively learning something, or want to learn about other things, and not just kind of go by the by and kind of go, right, this is what I'm teaching, but kind of fully invest in it. And of course we've all got things that we prefer and enjoy, but actually kind of having that element of wanting to improve and wanting to pick up skills is absolutely vital, because ultimately that's what we do as teachers, right? That's what we do every day in terms of communicating with our children and things like that. So yeah. we're coming to the end of the show, Scott. So I want you to give this book one final plug from your point of view. So I'm going to put you on the spot.
Okay.
If you could sum up, and don't read the blurb. I was really tempted to read the blurb. I was like, I'm not going to do that. But if you could sum up this book and pitch it in one sentence, what would you say?
Can I read Cressida Cowell's quote instead?
Yeah, do it. And honestly, if you've had feedback, do that instead. Yeah, that's absolutely fine, Scott. No problem at all.
Well, I just think she sums it up perfectly, particularly coming from somebody who's been a children's laureate themselves and is so passionate about promoting reading. And she says all children should be given the opportunity to read for pleasure. And this is an essential, accessible guide for every teacher. So I literally couldn't have summed it up better.
And do you know what I'll do? Just to finish off the set, I'll read Andy Taylor's as well. If you don't know who Andy Taylor is, you might know him by his Twitter handle, which is Mr. T's NQTs, who is actually coming up on a show in the very near future, I believe, with Mr. Tom Rogers. I think. I hope I've got that right. I'm hoping that's the case. I think he has anyway. But he says, the ultimate book for raising the profile of reading in your school. Scott's ideas are innovative, easy to implement and impactful. And that, as we've said all the way through this sponsored show, I would agree with that, because it is literally, one page per ideas. There's 100 of them in this book, all split up into different parts and sections. And they are very, very easy to, well, I say easy to implement. You've got to have the tools and the manpower to do it as well. But in terms of the theory behind them, it's gonna really improve how reading is viewed in your school and how things are going. So yeah, it was an absolute pleasure, reading the book, Scott. You've done a fantastic job putting this together. It's clearly a labour of love, which we always love in teaching. But it really is a fantastic resource, and I strongly recommend that everyone goes out and buys it. It is available now via bloomsbury.com in their 100 Ideas series, but it's also wherever you'd find books. Is that fair to say, Scott?
Yeah.
Yeah, online, physical as well. So go out, get it. I'm sure your school has got the money to be able to buy at least one copy. So yeah, go and get it, go and read it, kind of completely revamp what you're doing with reading in your school. Scott, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today. I hope you've enjoyed the show and being part of it.
Oh, absolutely. And thank you too, Ben. Thank you so much for your support and your kind words as well. It's been an absolute pleasure to really hear the effects of the book from you as well. So talking about reflecting on your own practice and taking some of the ideas, adapting them. Oh, that's music to my ears.
I think the only downside is that I received it right at the start of the holidays, so I haven't been able to share it with anyone yet. But first day back, next Monday, I'll be straight into to everyone and going, look at this book, start doing these, and go from there. But yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure, Scott. Enjoy the rest of your well-earned holiday. Hope the book continues to do as well as it has done so far, and that you get even more famous, if that's possible. Is anyone more famous than Cressida Cowell? I don't know. Maybe Marcus Rashford at the moment. Who knows? I don't know. Maybe we'll get him to read it as well. But listen, take care. Thank you so much, Scott. And to all the listeners, thank you so much for joining me on the Tuesday Twilight Show with Ben Thomas. It will be available through all of our kind of catalogues and websites and everything else if you've missed parts of it, or you want to listen back to it again or whatever. But the book is out now, 100 Ideas for Primary Teachers, Reading for Pleasure by Scott Evans. I've been Ben Thomas, and you have been a fantastic audience. Enjoy the rest of your holidays, and we will see you again in a couple of weeks.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.
This show